Today's discussion will be between two esteemed colleagues who are experts in the field of marine transportation. First, from USC Sea Grant, we have Dr. James Fawcett, USC Sea Grant's Director of Extension and Marine Transportation. Jim is a seaport specialist and an adjunct professor at USC in both the Dornside College's Environmental Studies program and the Saul Price School of Public Policy. Jim teaches marine environmental policy and coastal management. He's been with the USC Sea Grant for over 19 years, and he does have expertise in coastal policy and planning, seaport policy and management, marine environmental policy, and shipping policy. He's a well-known national and international expert in ports and maritime transportation, and he serves as a liaison with the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, the busiest ports in the United States, and the LA business community. He also has key contacts with Asian seaport researchers and managers. Jim is an urbanist by training. He focuses on the environmental impacts of the marine transportation industry and the decision regimes by which public goods are managed. Dr. Fawcett has a strong background in international shipping, and his interest in the marine affairs stems from his serving as an officer in the United States Navy. He holds an undergraduate degree in political science from California State University, Northridge, and both master's and PhD degrees in urban and regional planning from USC. We are also very honored to have Captain J. Kipling Louttit, who is the executive director at the Marine Exchange of Southern California. He was appointed to this position in January 2013. Kip is a graduate of the United States Coast Guard Academy, and he served in the Coast Guard for 30 years, retiring with the rank of captain. Captain Loutit's experience includes 10 years at sea in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and the Bering, Mediterranean, and Caribbean seas. He has 6 years in command of 3 Coast Guard cutters and 2 years as the commanding officer of the U.S. Coast Guard Integrated Support Command in San Pedro, California. Following retirement from the Coast Guard, Kip worked for 2 consulting firms on Coast Guard and Pentagon issues prior to joining the Marine Exchange. He is the current president of the Maritime Information Services of North America, which is the umbrella organization to which the dozen marine exchanges in the United States and Canada belong. Captain Louttit was a Sloan Fellow at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and holds master's degrees from MIT and Golden Gate University. And he is also a very respected member of the USC Sea Grant Advisory Board. We are so glad to have him work with us and advise us. I'm now going to hand it off to Dr. James Fawcett and Captain Louttit to begin their presentation and discussion. If anyone has any questions that pop into their mind while our speakers are doing their presentation, please write them in the chat and we can address them during the Q&A session. Okay, Jim, take it away.
Thanks, Linda, and welcome to our discussion today with Captain J. Kipling Louttit, U.S. Coast Guard retired. As Linda said, he is the Executive Director of the Exchange of Southern California, which, as you will see, is located high on a hill above San Pedro, overlooking the 2 ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. As Linda also said, he had a long career in the Coast Guard, was the commanding officer of 3 different Coast Guard vessels, and was also the commanding officer of the Coast Guard Station San Pedro. So he brings a very commendable level of familiarity and expertise to the Marine Exchange and to the ports of Southern California. Kip oversees a staff of maritime experts from both the civilian world and the U.S. Coast Guard, who, as you will learn, monitors ship traffic from California's central coast to the waters off of northern Mexico, with a mission of traffic control and safety in these very busy waters, as well as providing up-to-date information on ship arrivals, departures, vessel services, and status to hundreds of clients in the 2 ports. And as Linda also mentioned, this is the busiest marine freight port in the United States. The USC Sea Grant program has worked with the ports and with the Marine Exchange for the past 20 years, providing university expertise on issues of environmental quality, port management, and we act as a reliable source of information on our busy maritime supply chain. Our educational role includes a responsibility to interpret for the public the operations of the goods movement system that is frankly often just invisible to most of us, yet which contributes thousands of jobs locally and is a critical link in the goods movement highway from overseas to people throughout the US. We are delighted to have Captain Louttit with us today to discuss his work and reveal sort of, not really sort of, the inside story on how his staff manages the large volume of ship traffic bringing to the US huge volumes of goods from overseas. After our conversation, we'll provide an opportunity for those of you who are with us online to ask some questions. So what we'll do is begin by displaying a series of slides, and Kip and I will discuss the essence of what it is that the Marine Exchange does and why it's so important. So with that, Kip, I'm going to put on the slides, and we can start here. So 1 second here, and we'll get moving. Great. There we are. So Kip, it's all yours.
So thank you, Jim, and welcome everyone. Delighted to be with you. So this is our beautiful building on a hill in San Pedro, and it's perfect for what we do based in terms of size, location, and the equipment that we have. You can see the forest of antennas on the roof. Down on the lower left-hand side of the slide is the bumper sticker of the mission that we have, which is safe, secure, efficient, reliable, and environmentally sound marine transportation. And the shortened version of that is trying to provide maritime peace of mind to the maritime community and the American public who depends on the ports. So next slide, please. Yeah. So I always like an agenda. I'll talk about me a little bit, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, the Marine Exchange, which you can see circled there overlooking the ports, our Maritime Information Service, our vessel traffic service, the backup situation due to COVID, and the new queuing system for labor for container ships arriving at Los Angeles and Long Beach that started last fall.
And we should say also that this is, I said this was at the top of the hill. For those of you living in LA, it's up at the top of the hill by, if you're familiar with it, the Korean Bell in San Pedro. Next, Kip.
That'd be good. All right, my background was mentioned before, but very proud of my last ship growing up in New York. It was fun to go to Fleet Week in New York in 1997. And the 10 years at sea was great fun for any young people on. I'd highly recommend it. It was the commanding officer of the base in San Pedro that I had from 2004 to 2006 that got me this job. Still love to sail. And that's part of the attractiveness when I was hired, is that I understand both the commercial side and the recreational side of boating, which both happen in the LA Long Beach port complex. And it was fun. They're sailing to Seattle is the one picture. And then my wife and my dad, who was a Navy radioman during World War II, got to take a ride with me once.
Great shot. Great shot.
So we started back in 1923 in a shack on the top of Warehouse 1 in the port of LA. But the basic functions that we did 99 years ago still maintain. That's what we do today. The technology has just changed. But in simple terms, we assemble the schedule for all of the ships moving around the LA Long Beach port complex. We don't make the schedule. That's the value add that we have. So back in the day, we posted it on blackboards and printed it on paper and distributed it. We looked for the ships with telescopes, and then we would call the tugs and the pilots and the line handlers to line up all of the services. And communications was yelling out the window with a megaphone, flashing light, and semaphore flags. And remember that point when we get to the modern technology that we are now using, which enabled the new queuing process for labor. And it was until 1994 that we used that spindle with 3x5 cards to track the ships.
I think it's important here also for people to understand that the Marine Exchange operates as essentially as a clearinghouse for information. With two ports operating on both sides of the harbor, there's a lot of information that each of them has. And then there are many, many other individuals and organizations that need this information. And what the Marine Exchange has been doing since 23 is to be the consolidator of all that information. Correct, Kip?
Exactly.
And that's why it's so important. Anyway, that's sort of the background. We're going to see pictures of the modern Marine Exchange in a minute.
All right, so this is a typical day of ship traffic in the Pacific. So each one of those green triangles is a commercial ship coming and going across the Pacific. You can also see the coastal traffic down from Alaska and Canada, and it comes up from the Panama Canal. This image is part of a system called PAC Pacific Cracking, which is a consortium of the 5 marine exchanges on the West Coast. So mine here, the one in San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, and Alaska. With a school group, I'll usually ask, why are the ships going in a curve instead of in a straight line? But I'll give the answer in this format is, remember that the Earth is a sphere. We've now flattened out that sphere. It's called a Mercator projection of a chart. So while it looks like the ships are going in a curve, they're actually going straight across the ocean. Also notice all of the traffic that goes from the Northwest up through Unimak Pass in Alaska and back down to Asia and Russia. And we'll come back to this slide later, but that sets the scene for the big picture of the world of shipping that winds up in LA and Long Beach.
And the other colors, Kip, the green ships, as opposed to the red and the orange and purple, what do those represent?
So the green are the cargo ships, but there's also fishing boats and tankers, and it's color coded. There's about 8 different colors. So each ship these days has a transponder. If you're a pilot, it's akin to the identification friend or foe system that aircraft have. So depending on what type of ship is, determines the color. So you can see those clusters down in the lower left. Those are fishing boats. So.
Okay, and so all ships have to transmit this information?
Above a certain size. And so I see that there's a question about research vessels. I don't believe research have a special category. They would put themselves in as other or something like that.
Okay. It's quite amazing. We're seeing the entire Pacific Ocean here, and at least the Northern Pacific Ocean. And it's quite amazing to see all the ships. The other point I think that's interesting about it is that a lot of the ships seem to be on kind of a similar track across the Pacific. What is that all about?
So 2 things. A straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. So that would be the Great Circle route. But the other thing is the ships love to ride the current if they can, and they'll be dodging storms. So basically they're going to be following that Great Circle route. So that's why there's so many going the same place, but they will also, with modern weather routing, obviously dodge storms. And with the new queuing system for labor, we've seen a shift in ship traffic, and we'll talk about that more later.
Okay, cool.
All right, so taking that big picture of the Pacific and now bringing it in to the LA Long Beach Port Complex. As was briefed, it's the nation's largest container port complex. Los Angeles is number 1, Long Beach is number 2, and the combined New York, New Jersey is number 3. If you put LA and Long Beach together, they're the 9th busiest port complex in the world the past couple years. I don't have the 2021 figures yet, but what I do have, which is sort of mind-blowing, is that in 2021, the combined ports moved 20 million TEUs. So that's 20 million 20-foot equivalent units. So that's the short containers that you'll see pulled behind a truck. Most containers are 40 feet long, so it'd be 2 TEUs. But the fact that, notice that in 2020, they moved 3 million fewer, and in 2019, a little bit less than that. So the volumes have been increasing, and that's part of the reason that we have the backup is we're at record levels of cargo. But what's important to remember, and I'll have a slide in a moment, is while containers are the biggest subset of the total ships coming in here, we do have 1 million cruise ship passengers, half of California's oil, 500,000 cars, and the port complex supporting 4 million jobs nationwide. So on the left is LA, where you can see the blue arrow. On the right is Long Beach. And while they are fierce competitors from the marketing and the business development standpoint, trying to poach each other's ships so their port does better, from a public safety standpoint, from a vessel traffic standpoint, there's no line between the two. So police boats, fire boats, CBP, Coast Guard, sheriffs, all going back and forth to make sure that that port is as safe and secure as possible. And finally, in the upper right-hand corner, most of this conversation will be about container ships. So that's an example. And when the Ben Franklin came in 2016, 18,000 TEUs. And to put that in perspective, because most of the containers are 40 feet long, that would take 9,000 trucks to unload that one ship. And it would take 4,500 rail cars because they double stack the containers. That is why the goods movement system ashore is so vital to getting the containers off the ship. And what happened a year ago was the biggest ship ever to come in, which was the MSC Mia, 23,000 TEUs on one ship. And that is the biggest ship that is commonly on the waters today, are those 18 to 23,000 TEU ships. Back to you, Jim.
There we go.
All right, so I talked about containers being the biggest subset of the total. So there you can see that in 2020, containers were 47% of the traffic coming in here. But the rest of the pie there, so tankers are number 2, and bunkers, which kind of blows my mind. So 13% of the traffic. So 542 ships came in 2020 just to refuel. Long Beach has the tugboats, it's got the terminals, it's got the barges for this very efficient machine to have ships, for example, coming out of the Panama Canal up here to refuel and then going over to Asia because the fuel is plentiful, it's got good quality, and they have a very efficient way of refueling the ships in Long Beach. Bulk, 5% of the traffic. So that's things like gypsum and coal, stuff that is loose in the ship as opposed to in a container or a barrel or something like that. Number 5 are barges and articulated tugs and barges. This is the old fashioned stuff. It's oil from the Northwest, it's lumber from the Northwest, a lot of coastal stuff like that. Number 6 are vehicles. So these are big, basically floating garages coming in with your new car from Europe or Asia or wherever. Number 7 is other. So the question about research ships, crane ships, school ships, all that kind of loose stuff. Dr. Bob Ballard's research ship comes in and out of here. And finally, passenger ships are the last subset of the total, 2% of the traffic. And you can see that there's roughly one a day, 2019 being the last normal year, 2020 with COVID, there were only 92 between January and March. But containers are the biggest subset of the total, but this is a full service port with 13 container terminals, but more than 50 total terminals between the two ports.
And we should say also about the containers, that the container ships are generally on a schedule like an airline. And so the congestion is particularly problematic for containers because they're expected at a particular time. And when there's congestion, they cannot get into their berth to unload. And we'll talk about that in a minute here, right?
All right. All right, so now we'll dive into the 4 walls of the Marine Exchange. So on the left, our Maritime Information Service going back to 1923. And as I said before, we gather and collate the schedules, and that's the value add that we have. So those 50 terminals scheduling independent of each other, and as luck would have it, they'll schedule 2 ships to arrive at the same port at the same time, and obviously that's not safe. So we call the pilots and say, what order do you want these ships in? They say, we want ship A first, ship B second. And when they check in with us, We adjust their speeds, working with the ship's captain, so they arrive in the order that the pilots want them. So roughly 4,500 ships a year is the population that comes in, and people like Patty and Michelle, great attention to detail, because if the ship or the terminal, that the agent says, I'm going to berth 186, but they type berth 168, the whole sequence of tugboats, pilots, liners, their border protection are going to the wrong dock. So I'm really proud of Patty and Michelle and their other 3 colleagues that do that scheduling work. Their work then goes over to the Vessel Traffic Service, which started in 1994. And this is the only one in the country that is done this way, where you can see the virtual background behind me. We're a public-private partnership between the Coast Guard, the Marine Exchange, and the state of California. It grew out of the Exxon Valdez oil spill, where basically the Coast Guard showed up and said, remember, this is 1989, when Exxon Valdez ran aground, we're going to give you VTS 2000. And apparently the locals in California said, excuse me, it's 1989 and you're going to give us a VTS 11 years from now. The Coast Guard properly said, we have to do the requirements, we have to get the president's budget, we have to get appropriation from Congress, then we have to get 3 bids. And the locals said, Marine Exchange, you have a radar on the roof, looks like a VTS, started directing traffic. Unfortunately, we had no authority. And so some really smart lawyers got together and said, if we put 1 Coast Guard member on the watch floor, that will give the federal authority to direct the traffic. So there you can see Petty Officer Martinez in the picture. It's her reporting to the captain of the port that gives us the authority to direct the ship traffic. But particularly when things are backed up like now, having that Coast Guard presence, their authority in the building, and then our nimbleness being a private company really serves the ports and the American public well. So it is the maritime version of air traffic control, and Victoria and her 16 colleagues control 28,000 vessel movements per year. That's the wall of knowledge, if you will, that she uses to do her work.
And OS2 is Operations Specialist Second Class. So she's a petty officer from the Coast Guard doing the job. A couple of questions here for you, Kip. Obviously, the Vessel Traffic Service is a 24-hour-a-day, 365 days a year operation. What about the Maritime Information Service? Is it also 24 hours a day?
No, good question. It is 6 in the morning until 5 o'clock at night, because that's basically when the people who they need to contact, the agents, the terminals, are working that admin side of things. After hours, the phones are answered by the Vessel Traffic Service for anything that comes up during the night.
So in other words, the Maritime Information Service knows in advance not only where ships are, but when they're expected to arrive. And if adjustments need to be made, they are made during daytime hours, correct?
The VTS can adjust it. Ship will call up, and that's the beauty of the system, is if they say, hey, we're going to be an hour late because of fog or some kind of an engine issue, the VTS will have access to the exact same computer screen. So if you see just to the right of Victoria's head is the computer, which has the schedule, which comes from Patty and Michelle in the back. So it's seamless 24 hours a day.
Great.
So here's I thought you'd like to see the big picture of vessel traffic services in the US. And it says the purpose of a VTS is to provide active monitoring and navigational advice for vessels, and particularly confined in busy waterways. And the waters of Southern California, between here and Catalina, with all the ferries, firmly meet that. So you can see the stars of all of the vessel traffic services, which are owned and operated by the Coast Guard. Tampa is a cooperative between the Coast Guard and the Tampa Port Authority. We're the only one that's a public-private partnership. We're a 501c6 nonprofit, and very proud of 800,000 safe movements since we were established in 1994.
A laudable record.
Yeah. So here's the big picture of the watch floor. We always have 2 people on watch. So here you can see John is at the radar where Victoria was before, and Nick is on the desk. He answers the phone. He makes the computer entries, because we don't want the traffic controller distracted by that kind of stuff. So they serve 2 hours in each position. So 2 hours on the radar, 2 hours on the desk. and then a 2-hour break. There are Coast Guard rules that we need to follow on how many hours you can stare at a radar screen. So we've got 11 Marine Exchange members of the VTS, 6 Coast Guard members. So every watch has 2 Marine Exchange and 1 Coast Guard controller. And so that's a timely flip. We look from Morro Bay to the Mexican border with our sensors. We've got receivers of that AIS signal that each ship is transmitting. So you can see the names of the ships. That's all part of what's transmitted from the ship. And then the vessel traffic service piece on the right. And this is a neat, unique situation where we control the traffic outside the breakwater and the pilots control the traffic inside the breakwater. It's the only place in the country done this way, but it works extremely well. So the LA pilots on their side of the line, Jacobson pilots, which are the Long Beach pilots on their side of the line. So the center picture where you can see where it says Point Furman, that's where we are at. And the traffic radius that we control is out to 25 miles where they check in with us. We go through a protocol to make sure that they've done their steering and engine checks. When they get closer to the port, the captain has to be on the bridge. The vessel has to be in hand steering rather than autopilot. And then the right-hand screen where you can see it says Point Furman. Please note all of those circles. Those are the anchorages, and notice how empty they are. That is a normal day pre-COVID, and we'll come back to that. But basically, that's what's called the precautionary area outside the ports. You can see the shaded area coming up from the south, just like a road, is the traffic lanes coming out from San Diego, Panama Canal, and South America. And in from the west is the traffic around from Asia and down the coast. And in a sense, we have a 3-sector VTS, and it works seamlessly because we're all looking at the same equipment, and we'll have a picture of that in a moment. There you go. So as I said, it's the only place in the country done this way. So you can see in the lower left-hand corner, Petty Officer Thomas there on our scopes. Then the controller at the Los Angeles Pilot Station, the top right, the Long Beach Pilot Station. We have our backup computers, backup VTS in the Port of Long Beach Joint Command Center. Thank you so much. So there's Chi and Petty Officer Stuckey doing a drill one day. And these displays are also in the Coast Guard, but they won't let us take a picture. But again, that common operating picture enables us to make sure that we can move the traffic in and out of the ports and between the ports safely and efficiently, whether it's just a normal day or something that's horrible, like we've had 2 plane crashes, the mini tsunami, all of that kind of stuff. We're all looking at the same screens, so nothing is missed in a gap between them.
How long has the coordinated picture been up in the ports? In other words, how long has it been this well coordinated?
We started out right away in 1994, and actually our first, this is the Nor Control system, it's the brand name made by Kongsberg over in Norway. Jacobson Pilot Service actually had it alone before we did. They got a new model, they gave us the old one. So that was the start, and then LA jumped on, and then Long Beach jumped on post 9/11. The Coast Guard. So it kind of grew over time with both the technology changing and with the number of ships increasing.
So this is not just safety and coordination, it's also maritime security as well, correct?
Correct.
Excellent.
So now moving on to the more current events and the backup. And it's a huge challenge that's being met. So if you rewind 23 months to March 2020, when COVID first happened, this is a picture of what happened out our windows with the tanker backup. So COVID happened very, very quickly. The tankers take about a month to get here from wherever they're coming from, halfway around the world, in places far away as Iraq. So they're on the way. They have no place else to go. People stop driving, planes stop flying. All this crude oil coming into the refineries up to 710 and the 110. They had nowhere to go. So they anchored off of our port. So you can see all those white dots are the superstructures of the tankers. And then you can see mixed in, there's a couple white cruise ships, and the blue ship in the middle is a car carrier. So the oil companies did a fabulous job all on their own of turning off the supply of tankers coming in. And so by June, this whole population went down to 0. Life was good. We said, okay, Now we'll just, get back to normal traffic. Unfortunately, if you look at the bottom image, in September, we started the normal ramp up to the holidays, which we call peak season. So all the stores are ordering stuff for Black Friday after Thanksgiving and then the holiday season. And in 2020 was an amplified peak season. And I don't know about your families, but people started buying home gym equipment, home office equipment, remodeling their homes, remodeling their backyards, which is what we did. So it was an amplified peak season. And we went up to a total of 40 ships at anchor during the winter of 2020 to 2021. And this was a picture out our windows last November, so 3 months ago. And the records were 110 total ships at anchor, including 81 container ships. The problem was, when I say 110 total ships at anchor, there are only 55 anchorages. So we actually had another roughly 55 ships. Loitering is the politically correct term. Mariners call it drifting. And I'll have an image in a while. But once these ships run out of anchorages, we had them floating off of Catalina and spread out 40 miles, waiting for an anchorage, waiting to go into port. And the average backup out there was 2 to 3 weeks. To put that in perspective, 5 years ago, when there were contract negotiations between ILWU and PMA, we had 48 total anchor, including 28 container ships. So we have blown through every record that we've had in the past. The last time there were loitering, slant, drifting ships before this was 2004. There was some issue with the trains, and there were 6. So here, thank you, Jim, good timing. On the left is the normal pre-COVID look at the anchorages. So you can see outside the breakwater, there were 2. The ships are those white blotches. We've turned off the names while the ship is not moving. And on the right is October 2020 with as many as 55 ships anchorages or anchored. And you can see that down in the lower right-hand corner, for example, we've got some contingency anchorages off of Huntington, which hadn't been used in many, many years. And this is what it looked like, again, at the height, November 2021. So every one of those circles that you see off of Catalina is a ship. We are able with a traffic computer to put a ring around it with a 1.5 mile radius. So basically we're saying all the ships had to stay 3 miles from land, 3 miles from another port, or rather ship, and 3 miles from the traffic lanes. And so good people like Mike Connor here, who served in the Coast Guard for 20 years and now has been here for 20 years. This was just a situation with increasing risk, increasing lack of safety, and also increased emissions, because all of these ships, their engine isn't running while they're drifting, but they're still running their generator to keep the lights on, hotel services, the heat, electricity to the refrigerated containers. And back in like September, we said, this is unacceptable. We need to do something. And now we'll tell you about that. So this was the image that you saw right at the beginning of the brief of all the ships in the Pacific. And on the 16th of November, we launched what called the Pacific Maritime Management System, which is a partnership of the Marine Exchange of Southern California, the Marine Exchange of Alaska and Juneau, and we added Oakland to this system in January. So basically, if you remember that first picture where we were looking down at the ports from the Marine Exchange, queuing for labor was done until November by the same way that we did it 100 years ago when the port was formed, which was queuing upon arrival, originally at the breakwater and later at the 20-mile line. Why was it done that way? Because 100 years ago, the technology was telescopes, flashing light, and semaphore, and yelling out the window. So basically, when the ship passed LA Light, the Marine Exchange wrote down the time, and that was the time that the ships were queued up for labor. And if
when we say, Kip, when we say labor, we mean the longshore employees, the longshoremen who are line handlers, tying the ships up to the dock, and other parts of the labor contingent. That you can't unload the ship, you can't even put the ship in its berth, you can't even dock the ship without maritime labor on the dock.
Correct.
The ship can't do it itself.
And basically, when there's ample labor for the number of ships that come in, there's no issue. But for example, if Jim's ship asks for 10 gangs, and that's kind of the unit of issue these days to work one crane, it's called a gang. Let's say Jim asked for 5 and I asked for 5, but there are only 8 available for whatever reason. If Jim came through the breakwater first, he gets his 5 and I get the 3 that are left over. But it worked for 99 years because there was enough labor, and things were fine. We didn't have this big backup. About 20 years ago, they moved that line out from the breakwater to 20 miles because we had radar and we had VHF FM radio. So unfortunately, if you think to the slide before with all those loitering ships, you say, why were they doing that? It's because they had to cross the 20-mile line to get their timestamp from us to get in line for labor to unload their ship. And so some really smart people got together between the ports, PMA, PMSA, and the Marine Exchange and said, how can we do this better? And we looked around and said, wait a minute, every one of these ships is being tracked by satellite AIS. Every one of these ships has a satellite phone and satellite email. So we can now queue the ships for labor the moment they get underway from their last port of call before the US. So that could be the Panama Canal, New Zealand, Australia, Southeast Asia, China, Russia, Canada, all the way around the Pacific Basin. This can work by queuing upon departure. So if we're going to tell the ships don't come to LA Long Beach, we had to tell the ships where they might be able to go. Where do you spend that 2 weeks, 3 weeks waiting for your berth if you're not going to be crowded off of Southern California? So we created what's called this safety and air quality area. And starting up in the Northwest, you can see where the little sticker says 50 miles. We looked around and said, how far offshore do we want the ships to be for safety and for air quality? And there's been a tanker agreement for the past 20 years to stay 50 miles offshore as long as possible. So if the ship breaks down, rescue tugs can come out. And we said, if it's good enough for tankers, it's good enough for us. So you can see the ships are supposed to stay 50 miles offshore, Central and Northern California, all the way up to the Oregon border. Then Jim, if you go down to the lower right-hand side, we said, well, if it's good enough for California, it's good enough for Mexico. So we said, if you're going to loiter down off Mexico or Central America, also stay 50 miles offshore. The problem in the middle, you can see that there's the pink or magenta boxes, and those are the Pacific Missile Test Range. So north of Point Conception, the northern one is F-35 stuff, the new airplane, and south of Point Conception is where surface ships are shooting guns and missiles 6 days a week. So he said it's sadness if we're going to have container ships drifting where the Department of Defense is shooting missiles and guns. So we pushed that safety and air quality area to 150 miles offshore because those two boxes extend 140 miles offshore. And this really has worked well. We'll have an image in the future. So we say to the ships, please stay out of this box offshore until you're within 72 hours of your berthing time, and then you can come in. And the beauty of this box is it enables the ships to slow speed steam across the Pacific or loiter someplace that their company, their master thinks is a good, safe place. So just in simple terms, the ships used to come across the Pacific in 2 weeks at about 18 knots. But now if they know they're not going to get a berth for another 2 weeks, they could come across the Pacific at 9 knots, burn less fuel, create less emissions. And if they're a little bit early, they can find some place outside of this box where they'll turn off the engine and loiter, but they can loiter many, many miles apart instead of, as you saw that image, only 3 miles apart off of Southern California.
But if they are transiting, if they are not loitering, they can still transit these areas, correct?
Yes, so this is a very simplified image, and we're only talking container ships. So all other types of ships, tankers and car carriers and cruise ships, they still queue upon arrival because the services that they need are plentiful. So they still now queue when they cross the 25-mile line. This only applies to container ships because they're the ones subject to the backup, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. So I know this is a busy slide, but I know that you're a bunch of smart people, and it's important to see how this works. So this is the report that the Marine Exchange of Alaska sends us. And if I was remiss, you go, why Alaska? They've been performing basically the same function for the past 5 years for all of the ships going through Alaskan waters to make sure that they're safe, because they had some accidents and groundings that said, we need oversight of this ship. So basically Alaska was already doing it for the North Pacific. They're now just doing it for our part of the Pacific. So this is a report that they sent to us on the middle of December. But starting over on the left-hand side, you can see the names of the ships that are checking in with them. And moving right, UCC is a container ship. IMO number is just like their license plate or their VIN number on your car. Every ship has a individual number assigned by the International Maritime Organization, which is the water piece of the United Nations. So next column is important, which is last port of call. So notice looking down, one from Busan, Oakland, Yantian, China, Lázaro Cárdenas, Mexico, another one from China, and one from Tacoma. And this is a good spread of an average day of ships that are going to be coming to the United States. There you can see NPOC is the next port of call. So it's a mix of LA and Long Beach. And the way the system works is the master sends an email to the Marine Exchange of Alaska with their estimated time of departure. So you can see these are a bunch of ships that are planning to get underway. And we'll now focus just on the top one for simplicity. So the Monolani, the master sent an email and says, I plan to get underway at 6 on the 11th of December. When the ship actually gets underway, it sends another email to Alaska and says, I actually got underway at 7:36, so an hour and 36 minutes later. The next column with PAC MMS, actual time of departure. The PAC MMS up in Juneau looks at their screens, those green triangles, and says, yes, we actually see this ship moving. There was great concern that the ships would cheat because it's hundreds of thousands of dollars that could perhaps be saved if they cheated on their departure time, which would affect their queuing time and labor. So now we just get involved in simple speed time distance. The distance between those two ports of Busan and Long Beach is 5,270 miles. The standard speed for that transit, 21 knots. Divided out, you get 251 hours. So you add 251 hours to that actual time date of departure, and you get the calculated time of arrival of 1836, so just after dinner time on the 21st of December. And that's the old Zulu time, so that's the time in England, and we convert it to Pacific. So as soon as Monolani got underway, they have their queuing time for labor, and if their company says, well, your queuing time for labor is 251 hours from now, so about 10 days, but your berth time isn't for another 3 weeks, the captain can say, okay, I'm going to go slow speed steam. I'm going to take a longer route. I'm going to ride the current, whatever the captain wants to do to kill that extra time. And it's working incredibly well. So when we implemented the system on the 16th of November, the top image is a screenshot of all the ships that are loitering, slant drifting. And you can see we got down to 0 on the 3rd of February. 62 ships was bad for safety, bad for air quality, but you can see that we cleared everything out between the middle of November and the beginning of February. Now you're always going to get a couple of ships have come in with their 72 hours, and we now have the anchorages are full per winter protocols. So yesterday we had one container ship and one bulk ship loitering. That's just fine. We can handle that because we never want a ship late for the berth. So here's what it looks like across the Pacific on Tuesday, where you can see all the ships enrolled in the system. So they've sent their email to Alaska. They're now being tracked. And as Jim is pointing out, what has happened when you mentioned the routing earlier in the brief is many of them are going to loiter off of Mexico. So you can see all those green triangles.
Here's the, oh, whoops, sorry.
Yep.
Here's the border. The border is right here.
Yep.
So they're just off northern Baja California.
And 50 miles though. So it makes it look, but why are they going down there? Well, the weather's better, the water is calmer than off of central and northern California. So we are seeing a shift to the south of where the ships are commonly going. And then when the master gets within 3 days of his or her berthing time, they motor on up the coast And we're getting back to the situation of most container ships are now not anchoring, not loitering off of our ports, but going straight on in, that just-in-time delivery that was of the past. Now, the bad news is, as of yesterday, there were, thank you, Jim, 72 ships waiting outside of the safety and air quality area to get into port. So basically, the way this slide works is if you look way over on the left, that is 2019, and that was a normal year. And the normal number of ships at anchor pre-backup was 0 to 1. So there you can see where it went up. That's what I mentioned. It went up to 40 in the winter of 2019 to 2020. But there you can see it tailed down, and we got down to 9 ships of 2021. But then unfortunately, that amplified peak season happened again. And you can see it went up to 20, up to 40, up to 60. And it was that September timeframe said we need to do something. And in 27 days, the PMA, PMSA, 10 major ocean carriers and the major terminals got together and came up with this voluntary agreement, 27 days. So there you can see we implemented the system on the 16th of November. And actually the line, I put in the wrong place. I put it in October, sorry. But if you slide it over to where you see the red line going down to 3 yesterday, as soon as we implemented the system, the ship stopped outside the safety and air quality area, and how you see that it dropped off to that very safe level of 3, and the other 69 way offshore. So the twin goals of increasing safety and increasing air quality continue to be met. And it's just amazing it works. But the hook is, why does it work? As Jim mentioned before, you need labor to work your ship. So if you don't play by the rules, you don't get labor. And that's the reason the ships are all voluntarily complying.
And the point is that the ships in the queue are diminished somewhat from earlier on, but it's that they're spread out over the Pacific.
Yep.
That's fascinating cooperation on that.
So just a final slide, and I'll say this tongue in cheek. So I went to MIT, so every brief has to have an equation. So my equation is modern equipment plus great Coast Guard and Marine Exchange people equals a strong Marine Exchange and VTS. So there's that bumper sticker of safe, secure, efficient, reliable, and environmentally sound marine transportation. Debbie, for example, has been 25 years here as an information manager. We've got that teamwork between the Coast Guard members and our members. And we attracted great people such as Nick, who was in the Coast Guard for 20 years and retired from the Marine Exchange, 3 years as a Coastie, and now we have back. So that's the kind of expertise we have on the scopes, on the keyboards, keeping everything safe. And this was,
there we are.
yeah, there we are. This was what it looked like yesterday. Just 24 vessels anchored, so only 7 more than that normal of 17 pre-COVID, and we're very, very comfortable with that. Good for safety, good for air quality, and I look forward to your questions.
And that, of course, is the view from the Marine Exchange, which is a wonderful view. Okay, we're going to go to questions at this point. And so, Leah, it's all yours.
Yeah, great presentation, guys. That was so wonderful. So we have some great questions here. I will start with this question that says, does the port have any monitoring system that collects quantitative data on air and water quality related to the number of ships loitering? And if so, how far offshore does that monitoring system take measurements?
The answer is yes, both ports, and you've also got CARB, and you also have AQMD, and you also have the Corps of Engineers. We have briefed them all. I would just have to refer you to the ports, but all of those organizations are monitoring air quality. I can't speak as much for the water quality piece, but what I can assure you is that no ships are dumping anything they're not supposed to dump. Basically, the only thing they can dump while they're loitering, while they're anchored, is sink water. So with the toothpaste and dishwater, but all of, for example, the sewage has to be retained on board. And that was a challenge for us. When sewage tanks filled, the ships would have to go the proper distance offshore or come in to offload to a honey barge. And it was those extra movements which were also contributing to the increased risk that we had to solve with this new system.
That's all a part of the, the International Convention on Prevention of Pollution from Ships, which is an international set of rules for disposing of all sorts of materials at sea. And it also includes an air quality requirement. It must be said that also the ports, together with the Air Quality Management District, have developed the Clean Air Action Plan, which we didn't discuss, but has a great deal to do with cleaning up air quality in the two ports.
Great. And then there was a follow-up question from someone else that said, is there monitoring of the discharge, and if so, by who? And they said, very informational presentation.
No, thank you. If you see the little orange helicopter flying around every morning and every afternoon, that's the Coast Guard. And you can clearly see if there's a discharge from the ship. And then you've got the county out there. They are heavily watched by multiple organizations. Even the LA Port Police goes out there and circles the ships. And just that presence is also warning the captains that don't do something wrong. They know that California is just extremely strict on this, and there's a whole patchwork of different organizations that track this kind of stuff.
Moreover, the vessels also have to keep records, logbooks of overboard discharges.
Yep.
So that's important.
Great. Okay, so back to when you were talking more about when the ports were extremely clogged. This question asks, does that mean that you could expand the ports?
In terms of acreage, they're out of space. That's part of their challenge. They're trying to figure out, in fact, how to create inland ports where you would just unload the containers as fast as you could without concern for where they go, and you take them out in the desert and then you can sort them. Part of the problem they have now is when they stack them 6 high, the one you need is always on the bottom. And that's also why Longshore will say, don't blame us, because you got to pick up the box to give us space to unload a box. So I get asked, why are the cranes just sitting there doing nothing? And it could be that the terminal is clogged because there aren't enough trucks and trains to move cargo. And I please assure you, I am not picking on any point in the supply chain. So that's why when they said the ports are going to 24-hour day operation, the ports are saying, great, we're open. The trucks are saying, okay, I'm going to take the box. But then they get to the warehouse at 3 in the morning and it's closed until 6. So the whole system has to speed up. And also, to be clear, the safety and air quality area and the new queuing system does not solve the backup. All it does is spread the ships out for safety and air quality area. The backup was still, as of yesterday, 72, which is better than 109, which it was on the 9th of January. But still, we have a long way to go before we get back to normal. And the question is, are we going to get to peak season again before we get down to 0?
The other point too is that a lot of focus gets put on the ports as if the ports are causing the problem. The issue is that it is a supply chain, and it goes all the way from the Foot Locker store that is waiting for shoes to come in from the truck, and the truck's waiting for the railroad to deliver the container box so that to the distribution center, so that the truck can pick it up at the distribution center. And then the railroad has labor issues with respect to people being ill, and you can't see any of that. The one place you can see it is in the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach, because about 40% of all the marine freight coming into the United States comes into the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach. So at that one point, it's visible. Otherwise, you're not seeing the ships at sea, you're not seeing the railroads, you're not seeing the warehouses, but you are seeing at this node where the ships are waiting to unload.
Great. This question says, would fewer bigger ships reduce the congestion at the ports?
Yes and no. If you picture this ship, and the one of Ben Franklin, in some ways, the bigger the ship gets, the longer it takes to get an individual box off. So if it's the last one out on a 200-foot wide ship, the spreader bar has to go up high enough all the way out to get the last box. So actually what is being found is like 10 to 14-ish thousand TEUs is kind of a sweet spot. The other thing is, to unload these bigger ships, you need taller cranes. And several of the terminals are going to the monster cranes for the monster ships, but it has to be both tall enough and the boom long enough to get that last box. And so the thing also to remember is this does not tend to be a hub-to-hub port. We take ships in from all over. So many of the destination ports can only take a 2, a 4, or 8,000 TEU ship. So for the port to really be efficient, it has to be able to handle them all, not just the monsters.
Great. Oh, did you want to say something, Jim?
Well, the other thing too is that when these huge ships come in and unload a lot of cargo all at one time, that creates a pulse in the goods movement system that also has to work its way all the way through the system. It's like like the snake eating the, I don't know, eating the tennis ball, that pulse has to go all the way through.
Great. So we are approaching the end of the hour. So thank you guys so much for attending our first Lunch and Learn of the year, celebrating our 50th anniversary. And thank you so much to Dr. Fawcett and Captain Louttit for your wealth of knowledge and your time. For everyone that would like, so the slides will be posted. This is recorded, so we're going to have this on our website as well as on our social media. If you would like to follow along with USC Sea Grant, with any of our news, stay up to date with future Lunch and Learn events. Also, Dr. Fawcett has a ship's log online article series that talks about a lot of the topics that they touched on today. And Captain Louttit is often a co-writer of those. So if you'd like to follow along those, that's on our website as well as posted in our newsletter. So we're going to post the link. If you'd like to sign up for our newsletter, you can follow along there. And thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Great to see everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Feel free to follow up with me directly too. So.
Okay.